I'm here to introduce Jenny Hotchkiss, who is the Chief Exec of Derbyshire Mind. Thank you ever so much for your time, Jenny.
Thank you very much. Are you going to tell me if I need to stop?
I've
I've got a timer there.
Yeah,
okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Jenny. So, good morning, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me before, and I'm looking around the room, there are a couple of familiar faces, but maybe some people that I haven't met before. I'm Jenny Hotchkiss. I am the Chief Exec of Derbyshire Mind. So, I'm going to sort of try and cover in the time, briefly, 4 different things. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what Derbyshire Mind is and what we do. I'm going to talk about bits of the job, the Chief Exec role that I really enjoy, the good bits. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges of the role of being Chief Exec of a local charity. And then if I get time at the end, I just want to talk a little bit about lived experience, which is a little bit of a tangent, but is related to my role. So, for those of you who don't know, Derbyshire Mind is a local charity. So you've probably heard of the big Mind charity, and there is a national Mind charity, but Derbyshire Mind's a local charity, so we only cover Derby and Derbyshire. So across the country there are around about 110 local minds. And the interesting thing about Derbyshire Mind, which you might not know, is that we don't actually get any core funding from Mind. So we don't receive funding from the national organisation. So we very much identify as a charity, as a local charity, here to work with the people of Derby and Derbyshire. And we generate all of our own income, so we're independent, if you like, and we're legally an independent organisation from Mind. You probably already know we deliver a range of different services across Derby and Derbyshire. So we roughly, currently, although this is changing, roughly about 90% is advocacy services. So that's specialist advocacy and some community advocacy. And then the other 10% is what we kind of call our community mental health services. So that's things like we're just starting delivering the Living Well programme in Derby City. So that is peer support and wellbeing coaching. We also deliver our Mindspace programme, which is all about listening, if you like. People coming along, just having the informal opportunity to talk and be listened to. We're just about to launch our active monitoring programme, which is about guided self-help. So people getting the opportunity to work through common mental health problems with a facilitator, working, as I say, through a self-help process. And we've also got a Green Connections project, which is like a green care ecotherapy type project. So roughly about 90% advocacy, roughly about 10% sort of prevention work, community work, but that's changing. So we're really trying hard to grow our community work. So I would say now, probably in the next 2-3 months, that 10% is going to change, and we're doing a lot more in Derby City as well. So we're a company as well as a charity, so we have to report to Companies House as well as the Charity Commission. And we have a turnover of about roughly 1.2 million at the moment. So that's the kind of charity size that we are, with roughly about getting up. We will be close to we're between 30 and 35 staff. It fluctuates a little bit, but we will over the next few months we'll be getting close to 40 staff. So that's the kind of size of charity that we do. So that's a little bit about Derbyshire Mind. I'm sort of here to tell you a bit about my role as well. And I'll say right now, straight away, I'll put my hand up, I absolutely love my job. I really do. I love my role. I feel very privileged to do it. I feel like I've found my little groove in life. This is what I was born to do. And whilst on a day-to-day basis, the people who are around me might sometimes not notice that, I do absolutely love the job. So I suppose I enjoy all aspects of it. One of I suppose the real key bits about being a charity chief exec as opposed to any other job, number one of the really great things about it is the variety of the role. So a local smaller charity, the CEO will be everything, a big broad scope, everything from leading the strategy, which is sort of quite sort of high level work, I suppose, doing research and consulting with people, all the way down to, and I always use this as an example, but this is actually true, hoovering my own office. So it's that kind of scope, it's all the way through. And that's the bit I absolutely love. So I get to do a bit of finance, I get to do a bit of personnel and HR, mental health stuff, the technical side, working with external partners, and doing some real kind of roll your sleeves up, get the fundraising tins out and go to community events sort of stuff as well. So I absolutely love that variety. It's a great job because there's lots of different facets to it, and no day is ever the same, if you like. The other thing I also really like, which I think a lot of people identify with, is just working for a charity like mine, or working in probably lots of the roles that people are in today. It's just amazing, isn't it, to have that link to the cause that you're really passionate about. So having that role that you do, that actually it's not just a job, it's more, it feels like you're doing something you really care about, and that's something that I really enjoy as part of that role, if you like, but also just on a personal level. And then the other thing, I really like the people side of my job. There's a lot of people stuff, as you can imagine, so there's a fair bit of leadership involved, and also just general kind of working with volunteers and service users, so I love that people side of it. But also the voluntary sector. I used to work in a different sector for about 15 years. One of the really great things about the voluntary sector is that as sort of the chief exec, so the person who's leading the organisation, I can make quite quick decisions, so it's quite informal, quite flexible. Not to the degree that we don't do things properly, but there's not a lot, because we're a small organisation, you've got that kind of big structure around you, all those lots of different layers to go through, although I report to a board of trustees, so it's really helpful to be able to make quick decisions. I can move money around if I need to within the confines of the contract, and we can respond quicker if we see like there's a need in the community, or there's something else that needs developing. We can do that really quickly. So I really love to be able to make those quick decisions and have that sort of informal, sort of more flexible approach, if you like. How am I doing? I can't see the clock very well, Jenny. Pardon? Have I? Okay, right. I thought it was supposed to be 10 minutes in total. No worries. So I'm getting on to the challenges now, so this might take a while. So the challenges of the role. There are lots of challenges, but they're good challenges, if you like. You know, they're things to get your teeth into, and there's things that make the job interesting. One of the big challenges of running a smaller charity, not just a mental health charity, but lots of different charities, which I think is different from, for example, the NHS or social care, is that the weight that I feel on my shoulders a lot of the time in relation to financial stability. So as I said before, we generate all of our own income, so we have no core funding at all. Which means that if we don't get that right, if we don't generate enough income, if we don't have enough contracts, if we don't do our fundraising properly, it's not just a case of losing a service or making some people redundant, which would be bad enough in itself. Those things would be really difficult on their own, but there is a risk that if you don't run the charity properly and get that strategy right and get your income generation right, then not only do you have to do those things, but you also could end up winding the charity down. So that's one of the big challenges for the charity sector in general, is that it's like running a business, only it's not a business, it's not for profit. You're constantly having to make sure that you're staying afloat. And I think it's a huge challenge for the voluntary sector, because whilst my brain and my time and my resource and that of my staff is over here worrying about have we got enough money, and you know, are we going to be able to keep going, and can we do everything we need to do, I could be using all of that energy over here working out how we could better support service users. So Derbyshire Mind is by no means the only charity that kind of struggles with that stuff, but it's trying to make sure that we've got enough sustainability to put more of our energy into actually supporting people with their mental health, rather than worrying about, you know, have we got enough money, essentially. Some of the other stuff, one of the sort of, I suppose, exciting challenges of running a mental health charity, again, lots of you will identify with this, is that there is just so much we could do. So there's so much need out there, and there's so many ideas and so many things that would make a difference. And as I said before, like limited resources. So one of the huge challenges we have, and something that we're sort of constantly talking about as a management team or a board of trustees, is okay, we've got these million ideas and there's loads of energy and enthusiasm in the room, we could do this, we could do that, brilliant. And so it's always trying to work out how, of this sort of whole bundle of ideas and this smaller resource over here, picking out the ones that are going to make the real difference. Which ideas, which services, which support, which interventions are actually going to make the biggest difference and make the biggest use of our funds. And that's the bit where we kind of need to reach out and talk to service users, to talk to partners, talk to other people, because if we don't do that, then we're at risk of going off and having wonderful ideas that we sort of, because as I said before, I can make quick decisions, so I get very excited and then I sort of try and run off and do something. And actually, if you don't think that through properly, before you know it, you realise that someone else is already doing it, or it's not quite right for the people in that particular community. So one of the really good challenges is there's loads to do and there's lots of different exciting ideas, and trying to just hone that down to make sure that we're making the best use of our resources. And the last sort of challenge that I think we sort of always trying to work on, which isn't unique to the voluntary sector, but I think it has a certain kind of edge or slant on it, is recruiting staff, retaining staff, supporting staff and training staff. So my experience is that recruitment is hard for everybody at the moment, but voluntary sector salaries tend to be on the low side, so that doesn't help. But also, one of the things that we're always trying to get over is that in many of the contract budgets, or even in our own budgets, there's not really very much in there for things like staff training or support. So we certainly in Derbyshire Mind Charity, we've got however many it is, 35 absolutely committed people who want to do the role because they're interested in mental health and they want to make a difference. But we are heavily reliant on that goodwill a lot of the time in the charity sector, because we don't offer the big salaries. And we struggle with career paths in a smaller organisation, as you can imagine. There's not lots of layers to go through. So that's a challenge as well. And I think the last thing, again, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. There isn't a whole load of direction. So the way that the charity works is we've got a board of trustees who are all volunteers. And we've got a really good board from lots of different backgrounds with lots of different expertise. And I like to describe the board as kind of like the Admiralty. So they set the direction, they decide where we want to go. And then as the CEO, I'm kind of like the captain of the ship, so I've got to make sure that the ship's safe, the crew are on board, that we've got all the equipment. So I've got to sail the ship to the destination that the trustees have identified, if you like. So there's the direction from the trustees, but essentially as a charity, you completely set your own direction. You decide your own vision, your own organisational values, your own strategy, which I'm sure is true of other organisations, but there isn't that kind of big machinery around you like there is, for example, in the NHS, where you've got national directives coming down. So on the one hand, that's really good, because it means you can do what you like effectively in many ways, providing it's within the right values and frameworks. But on the other hand, you have to really, really drive it. You have to come up with ideas, you have to come up with new ways of thinking, and you have to think about, as I was saying before, what are those priorities and where do you take the organisation. So there's a lot of work and thinking that goes into what direction the charity needs to go in. Nobody's going to tell you that, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of self-starting in the charity sector. Like I say, a bit like in business, but not for profit. The outcome is helping people. So the last thing, I think I've got time. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just a little bit about lived experience, because probably a number of you in the room have been in various different meetings or discussions, whatever way, talk about lived experience of mental health. We often talk about experts by experience, and we have different people who join different meetings or different pieces of work to kind of provide that input of people who understand what it feels like to have a mental health problem. But the thing that interests me is that I think it would be really helpful if as people who are leaders in the sector can also talk about their lived experience as well. And I don't just mean leaders as in people in the top of organisations, I mean leaders throughout throughout different parts of the system. Because actually embedded within lots of the things we do are people everywhere with lived experience. 1 in 4 people, isn't it, have experienced a mental health problem at some point in their life. And if it wasn't you probably know someone who did. So for example, I have OCD and I'm largely recovered, so it doesn't really affect my life that much. But it's just an example of everybody can bring that lived experience to the work that we do across all sectors. And I think sometimes we forget that you don't necessarily have to have that label of expert by experience. You can bring some of those experiences to what we do. And it's something I wanted to just use this opportunity to talk about, just to kind of say, even people who are running charities, even people in the NHS who are in some senior roles, everybody, could possibly have some lived experience of a mental health problem. And I'm one of those people. And I think it's a really good opportunity to recognise that and to try and make it more comfortable for people to share if they want to, absolutely if they want to share some of those lived experiences. Because every time I go to a meeting to discuss support, what do we do next? I'm coming as the Chief Executive of Derbyshire Mind, but I'm also coming as Jenny, who understands what it is like to have a mental health problem and understands what it's like to struggle with those things. And that means that we can bring all of those experiences to that work. I suppose one of the reasons I mention that is because in Mind, specifically, we have a lot in Derbyshire Mind as well. We have a lot of people who work for us who are volunteering who also have lived experience. So we actively recruit people with lived experience. And I think it's one of the real strengths of the voluntary sector that we do that a lot, and we really focus on that. So I think that's everything I want. I'm looking at Jenny because she's my timekeeper. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Have we got time for questions, or should we?
I think we've got Paul Plum.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'm in the road, I'm pretending that much stuff.
Well, what I was going to say was, because I don't want to mess up the timetable, I'm going to be literally around all day. I'm in a fairly bright top. So if anyone has got any questions or you just want to come and have a chat, I'll be around. So by all means, come and find me and track me down and we can have a chat. Is that okay? Yeah, go for it. Am I allowed?
Yeah. So we've got Rethinking Derbyshire and Derbyshire Mind. What's your vision as opposed to, I know Rethink is what? What's the, I'm struggling to understand what the difference is with Derbyshire Mind.
Yes, so I'm not sure what what Rethink's overall vision statement is, but Derbyshire, pardon? Oh yeah, so they deliver the peer support contract in Derbyshire, so they deliver that work. So I think probably the difference on the ground in terms of the service side of it is that we also do deliver a small amount of peer support, so there's some similarities there. Our vision statement, if you like, in Derbyshire Mind is more focused on we want everyone in Derbyshire to have good mental well-being and to live their best lives. So that's our kind of very general vision statement. So I won't go into lots of detail, but we've got some specific priorities within our strategy, which mainly focus around early intervention, so supporting people when they start to struggle with a mental health problem rather than having to wait, if that makes sense. So some of the things that we do that are slightly different to Rethink will be some of our community mental health work, where I mentioned Green Connections and Mindspace. So there will be some similarities with what Rethink do. I would say probably the main difference in Derbyshire at the moment is they are perhaps more focused on the complex needs side, whereas our community mental health is more focused on mild to moderate and more prevention work. There's a lot more I could tell you about that, so maybe catch up with me later.
I think we might not better, but it'd be worth.
There's a lot of things I think really link well with social prescribing and what we're trying to do. So yeah, definitely it'd be good to talk to you about that for sure. That's quite a short answer to what could be a long question.
Yeah.
So,